Most programs that we do a pre and post stress and well-being assessment. And over the last 10 years, we are seeing more and more that people are defining their normal state of being as being in a stress response. And when we're in a stress response, it's beating up our bodies, right? Because we got the cortisol, the adrenaline, and then it's impacting our ability to think clearly, communicate, right? All of these things. And because, as we've talked about, 90% of our thoughts are the same as the day before, 95% of our thoughts are being run by the subconscious. If we don't have self-awareness of how we're showing up, and we don't have tools and techniques to get out of the stress response, right, into this more coherent state, then it's Groundhog Day every day, right? That stress response is just what we become used to. And then when we're feeling the anger, the anxiety, or whatever it is, our body gets used to it. And so it gets addicted to it, right? And so that just becomes our normal state of being. And I think one of the biggest things we see is when we can really work with leaders and, first of all, have them just have awareness of their state, right? Just like, how are you feeling? Doing a lot of reflective exercises. How are you showing up? What's an ongoing stressor, right? Have that constant awareness starts to create new awareness in the neural networks, right? For them to identify it. And then to actually get them tools to use in the moment, even during stressful situations, we see huge shifts, even within a short amount of time. And, on a more macro level, what we're really trying to do is take, our clients from this victim mode of like, this is just how it is, to even just with simple tools and techniques to go into creator mode and know they have the ability to change moment by moment. And the beautiful thing is, when you start to do these tools and techniques, even 5 minutes a day or 30 seconds at a time, it starts to rewire the nervous system and you start to create new baselines of how you're showing up. And we continually see this. And, our partners at the Heart Math Institute, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. They are amazing. They've been doing now 40 years of science and research on the heart and brain and getting into heart coherence. And they have worked with, veterans that have had severe PTSD that weren't making any progress. And after even just doing 5 minutes of what we call this quick coherence technique, it's literally shifted the baseline and changed the chemicals in the brain, more gray matter in the frontal cortex, the amygdala shrinking. There's just story after story. And I think I'm a broken record with our clients to say, you got to have awareness throughout the day and use these techniques. Just keep using them, right? And this is what creates a new baseline. And as you and I talked about, the self-awareness piece, and you always talk about this in Strategic Coach. Half the exercises we're doing are just creating awareness of what our behaviors, our limitations, right, are. And to have that self-awareness to then know we can make different choices. And, we just talked about the Carl Jung quote. I think it goes, until you make the unconscious conscious, it runs our life and we call it fate. But when we become aware of our thoughts, we're like, oh, that's not real. I've just been conditioned to think that, right? From my childhood or from 2 weeks ago. And when we're like, okay, I can witness that thought without being attached to it. Oh, and now I actually have the power to choose different thoughts, right? That actually serve me. And when we start to see that, and we start to see our clients have these choice points where they'll actually pause, right? Take that couple seconds, and instead of reacting, right, going back to past behaviors and baselines, and then they know they have space to create different decisions and they have the power to do it, it changes their lives.
So what I'm hearing you say is that like the famous Star Wars line, Luke, this is your destiny. What basically is, in essence, it's this idea of these compounded stacking of thoughts that then people just go, well, this is my fate or destiny, right? And so what I'm hearing you say is actually, um, that doesn't have to be on autopilot. One of the things that you had said earlier, not in this episode, but in a conversation we had maybe like a year ago, we were talking about what we think we control and what we like don't realize that what we don't control. And it was specifically around things that happen to us and we think that our brain is in charge, but our body is the storage unit. And that we store all things that whether we are conscious of or actually subconsciously unconscious of, I think I'm saying that right. Um, that we don't even aren't even aware of happening. It could be body language, could be energy, it could be these stressors, right? I think we are aware. I think we all think that we are aware of these stressors. And so I'd love if you commented on how like the body functions physiologically in terms of actually storing these things. But I think even before that, I think we hear the word stress, and I think it's sort of like we hear the word stress so much that it actually stop having the impact of being like you're stressed and be like okay, people just go, okay, well, sure. It's sort of like a glib word to say. How do you know if you are stressed? So like when you're walking like these CEOs, these special forces people through to be able to go, am I actually stressed? Like, can you walk us through in terms of like, I know that I'm stressed if and when I feel.
Yeah, it's a great question. With stress, I mean, there's a lot of indicators. Could be related to how you're sleeping, if you're feeling reactive, if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling burnt out. I mean, obviously, our clients, blood test will indicate a number of things. If we've got sort of high cortisol, people know well, actually, they don't always know that they're stressed, right? Because they're on such automatic behavior. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the reactivity, right? The living in the past or the future, not sleeping, gaining weight. I mean, there's a number of different things. Stanford Medical School, I mean, there's been a lot of studies, but they talk about 70 to 80% of all chronic illness and disease is caused by stress. We've even seen studies that are higher than this. And we continually see that specific stressors manifest differently in different parts of the body. And again, we're living in such a fast-paced society that we're sort of cut off from the head down. So we're not even aware of what's going in our body, right? Or what's happening. And so with that, then, physical symptoms start to manifest. But stress is an interesting word, right? Because we'll lead different programs on what stress really is, right? And so we say, our stress is around challenges, right? Like, and what's really interesting is with different folks, they could be doing the exact same thing, which could be defined as stressful or challenging. And depending on the mindset of the person, if they look at it as a challenge and they frame it as an opportunity, their body will actually create chemicals and hormones that serve them. Like an example is like DHEA, right? The vitality hormone. And so this can actually serve them. And when other folks look at it as something that's overwhelming or whatever, they're going to produce completely different chemicals that work against them, right? That will put them in to this fight or flight mode. And, there's been a lot of different research, even with the Department of Defense, that even this was World War II. They did a whole survey and a study with soldiers that were connected to the higher purpose of fighting for the country, and they had some higher purpose beyond themselves, they were able to maintain performance a lot longer than the soldiers that were in a complete stress response and depleted, right? They fell off this curve a lot longer. And so I say that just to say, like, our thoughts really activate what's going on in the body and how we perform. And then, you talk a little bit about the body. Yeah, the body really can store emotions in it. And, one of the things we've been playing around with is when we have trauma and we can't, especially when we're younger, let's say we have a traumatic experience, we don't have a voice to really express ourselves. A lot of times then the trauma gets stored in the body, right? And so there's just a ton of really interesting modalities that help move it out, including, I don't know if you know, internal family systems, IFS, or there's some other things. But one of the things that's been the biggest shift for me is I grew up in an environment that was, emotions weren't good. It's a lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of violence. And so it was just safe to just be quiet. So not express, hold the trauma in, but obviously it starts to live in the body. And when I started to actually feel my emotions and feel the sensations in my emotions, even the uncomfortable ones, I felt like that was one of the most powerful things for me to actually move through what I was feeling. And one of the ways was to actually feel the sensations in my body, to actually acknowledge them, but without putting a story around it. And so for me, a lot of people will hold stuff around the solar plexus, and I would just feel the physical sensation. I would stay in it, and I would stay in it, I would stay in it, and then I could feel it releasing, right? When we feel something and we put the story to it, right, around the pain or the memory, I find that it's harder to move through. But God, when we start to actually listen to our body, just like the most intelligent system on the planet, we can really move through a lot of things.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm really curious. I mean, with your own journey, and you kind of inference that, like, hey, that toxic masculinity, violence. And so let's pause that portion there. And then you said something earlier about that there are two types of people. There are people who go that, like, it's almost like this is happening to me versus like this is happening for me. And I think that even the conversation and potentially I think where maybe the performance happens is even beyond that, and it's happening through me. And I'm curious, what is the difference between the person who goes, this is happening to me, and the person who just, I mean, is it just someone just finally just had acceptance and they're like, well, I guess I can either fight it or I can just realize that this is like real life and it's happening to me and I'm going to turn it to a get to. And then I'm curious, how do you answer that? Like, how do people, is that something natural? Is this something like genetic? And then I'd love for you to, if you would be willing to dive into your own personal journey, because I have imagined that there are people listening to this podcast and going like, well, toxic masculinity, violence, yeah, that maybe haven't actually, that they still have too much power around the story. So can you first portion set the scene? What's the difference between the person who goes, this is to me versus for or through me, and how they get that shift, and then your own journey? Because I believe there's probably a lot of people who've had that same upbringing who are probably still rerunning that program again and again and again.
It's such a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. Well, I think one of the things we always explain to our clients is are wired, we've been wired this way for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And just to go over again, right? Like we talk about, we've got these 60 to 70,000 thoughts. and 90% are the same as the day before. 70 to 80% are unhelpful, right? Thoughts by the National Science Foundation. And 95% of our thoughts are being run by the subconscious. So when we tell people that their behavior becomes less personal, they take it less personal and they're just like, okay, that's how our operating system runs. And when we don't when we're not aware of our thoughts, right, and our emotions, then our behaviors just become automatic. And so I think where I have seen the biggest change just with clients, with friends, with whoever, is when they've actually worked with people like you or with our company, and they actually have a structure where there is reflection. There's constant reflection of their thought patterns, right? To have that awareness. And then there is some leader, some facilitator, right? Some friend that then says, is there actually a different way to think about it? And I'm not trying to simplify, because I think there are some people, that might just be born to be more positive, but I think it's harder and harder in the world we're living in today because of the trauma, the distractions. I mean, people don't even take the time to reflect. So again, I think when you're in strategic coach or you're working with different programs, when you can actually start to understand your belief systems, and then if we want to go a layer deeper, we want to understand why we have those belief systems, right? And when we identify that, and then we understand that there's different choices, it becomes really powerful. And a lot of times, we're very tough on ourselves, right? Like the inner dialogue that we say to ourselves, we would never say to anybody else. Like once we get to know an executive team and we've worked with them for a while, we'll do an exercise where they write down all their limiting beliefs, and then they have to share it with a partner as if they're saying it to their partner. And it's brutal, but then they're like, okay, I'm never going to say that again. Right. But it's not only recognizing, but it's reframing our thoughts also. So, okay, I'm trying to, like, an example. Okay, I'll give you an example of a personal example for me. I, because of the environment I grew up in, I learned not to be vulnerable, right? Because nobody was listening, nobody cared, and it kept me safe. And so as I moved through my own journey in relationships, in my marriage and, different romantic relationships, I had a hard time being vulnerable. And I just thought there was something really wrong with me, right? And it was hard because I wanted to be, but it was like so in my body. And as I worked with my own coach who was trained in IFS, as they went back and she talked about why this might have occurred, she's like, how did this lack of being vulnerable serve you, right? When I was younger. And I realized me not being vulnerable and just playing small actually kind of kept me alive, right? It kept me safe because the more invisible I was in my household, it created less friction and less tension. And so when I could start to understand, I'm not going to judge how I showed up as less vulnerable because it actually was a tool, and I could start to learn to embrace it. I reframed it to move the energy through me, right? And we can do that with everything, right? Like we can go back to these belief systems and like, how did it serve us? Why did we show up like that? And the more we can embrace it and not push it away, the more we can integrate it, we've really seen some cool transformations for people to move forward.
I really love this idea of you talking about, it's not to say that it didn't happen, but it's like it did happen. And the reality is that it was a microcosm. So there's two things. I'd love for you to dive into more like what was it that you had to reframe and how did you do it? Because I think there's people like, oh, you just reframe it. So I'd love to, like, if you're willing to share, like, what was that thing and how did you actually go, I see it, I believe I see you, but I'm not going to fully energize it. And so that's number one. So, but the other thing I realized that there's the trauma, and then there's the thing that I think that no one, and I'm realizing now as I'm listening to you, Jeff, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. There's all the micro tears, the micro traumas that happen when you have to repeatedly go back and or you go back and replay it, and or you experience the effects of that trauma, like as you were talking about in your relationships. I wasn't being vulnerable, right? These are all these little now new micro traumas that are compounding on the original, if you want to say the culprit. So I'd love if you'd be willing to if share in terms of what was the thing that you had to reframe, how did you do it, and what your thoughts are on these idea of like these micro, like what I was just talking about, these other additional compounding micro tears or traumas.
Yeah, I think one of the things I had to reframe was the piece of not being vulnerable and being avoidant, right? So when I was a kid, I love my mother, but she, her and my stepfather were very reactive. And it was a little bit like, you were the best kid in the world or the worst kid in the world. And there was an intensity. And so I just learned to just shut off, because as a kid, it's hard to go through that emotional roller coaster, right? Of continually being disappointed or opening, sort of, metaphorically, like opening your heart and feeling it, and then, getting punched in the stomach. And so I just think we learned just to shut down. And so, when I would show up in relationships like that, there was a lot of judgment that there was just something broken in me. And as I learned to reframe, especially reframe like that little boy, right? That's 4 or 5 or 6, where you can really start to have compassion for yourself, and you can start to understand, like why that little boy did it and why it was a survival mechanism. And just that, right, starts to reframe it. And then with the micro reframes, what I started to learn much later in my life is if I started to feel avoidant or didn't want to be vulnerable, instead of going back into past behaviors and baselines, going into that unconscious behavior, I would stay present to it. And I would say, okay, why are you feeling like this? What's going on? It's not real. Like, you're safe now, right? Like, you're safe in the moment. And I would actually feel the emotions, and I would just say, is there a different way to feel? Is there a different way to think about it? And every time I did that, I started to create new neural networks and a new baseline for how to show up. And I also realized the stories that I had created, even when I was married, I would project things onto my wife that were around my mother that were not true. And so one thing that's been really healing is we have a really good friendship now, and we've been able to go back and talk about like what happened in our marriage and really each own how we each showed up, like how we contributed to maybe some of the challenges. And that's been incredibly healing to have that safe space to talk about this and to really learn moving forward how to show up. And so, I would say as I hopefully evolved and I was in future relationships, when I started to feel like I wanted to run or I wanted to shut down or whatever, I would stay in it. And one, I would put perspective to it. And two, I'd stay in it because I knew it was my biggest growth opportunity. right? So I reframed it, and I've been very much on a spiritual journey. So from a high level, when we talked about like how we reframe stuff, I'm a huge believer in I was just meant to go through everything to get me to where I'm at today. Like I wouldn't change any of it. I mean, obviously there were some tragedies and, those type of things that I wouldn't want that for those people. But as far as my own experience, I really, it's just now I look at it as a blessing and I just show up that way. Yeah. And I've learned to just do these little mini reframes most of the time. Right. And I can even when I feel angry or reactive, like I own it, but I have awareness of it versus going back to my unconscious behavior, snapping at people and maybe being a victim or feeling sorry for myself. And it's just allowed for me to move through things and show up differently.
Well, thank you, A, for sharing. I think that was that's really impactful. And I love the phrase that you said at the end there. You said, I like, even when I'm angry, because that's a emotion, everyone. Like, I don't care who's listening to this. If you say you're never angry, well, that might be a first sign of leading indicator of repression. Again, but you said I own it. So can you give me an example, either for yourself or what you've seen, where in terms of like you're angry, right? Because that is an emotion. People go, well, just don't be angry. It's like, well, that's not really being present. Because I think when you're being present, you feel your feelings. So when you have the anger, how in your mind have you learned, and how do you actually coach people to go, like, you better own this part of that shit, right? Like that anger.
One of the things I truly believe I witnessed is nothing is personal. We're all just operating from our own lens and our own system. And so, I tell leaders this all the time. It's for 100 different reasons that you can't control. It's because of the way you look, the way you talk, like, because you remind somebody of their father, mother, brother, old boss. Like, we're constantly being judged. And I think when we can really own that, and it just allows for us to let things go, right? And the second thing is, I think a lot of times when we get angry or mad, we want to find an external source to put that anger on. But the way of mastery, right? This path to masterhood is just going internal and feeling it, right? And taking complete ownership of it and then moving through the world that way. And, we call these like choice points. We will work with clients that have had years of the same behavior with somebody, and it just keeps playing out. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a senior partner at a big consulting firm, and she kept playing out this interaction with her son. Like, the son would come into her office, he would be doing things to trigger her, she would react, they would explode, right? And then they'd both be in cortisol and adrenaline. And so as we would do sort of these awareness exercises of like, okay, like, what's the ongoing stressor? My son, how does it make you feel? Angry. How do you show up in a suboptimal way? I explode and then I'm distracted for 4 hours. And then we do a technique to get her into this more coherent state. And then we say, is there a different way to show up that serves you and your son? Or is there a different thought and a different emotion? So we did that a number of times. So now it's in our neural networks to actually have awareness. So now the son comes in, it's being a brat, asking for money, being distracted. She could feel herself getting angry, but she realized now that she actually has a choice. And because we had played it out multiple times before, she had the awareness. So the first thing she did was heart-focused breathing to get into this more coherent state. And then she had set the intention to just be curious about her son's behavior and actually have empathy for what he's going through as a 15-year-old. So we reframed that. And then she actually, instead of reacting, showed up and asked him questions of how he was doing. Right. And so a couple things happened. One is by her changing her energetics, literally changing her heart's field, she set a different field with him. Like, and I could talk more about that. Two is instead of going back into their similar behaviors, she changed the pattern. Three is she understood the son coming in there and being a brat really had nothing to do with her. There was something more underlying within himself that he wanted fulfilled, right? So as she asked him questions and she's like, how are you? Right. And she went deeper and deeper. It changed, it broke the pattern of how they were behaving. And he started to open up about some of the stressors he was having in school and just some of the own insecurities he was having about himself. So she was actually able to get to the root of the problem and provide him love. And it changed their dynamics moving forward. So 3 years of this playing out these roles, and her, by having 10 minutes of awareness, she changed their interaction moving forward.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Can you talk about the change in the field? I mean, in a lot of ways, in military strategy, it's like you basically have changed the tide of the war. Instead of it being you're I feel like in most times when you're angry is that you are trying to sell the other person of like why you're angry. And it's I've heard the statement, a statement is just a poorly worded question. And I sort of feel like what you're just saying, a reaction is just a poorly worded question, either to yourself or to someone else. So can you talk a little bit about how when she changed that her field, it changed the field? Because you said, hey, like we can go more into that. Like I want to know more about that because I think that we hear these things and we're like, okay, this sounds great. This sounds reasonable. But I think this gets to the root of what does performance mean?
One of the cool things, and the mystics have been talking about it for thousands of years, but we actually all have our own field that we're influencing other people. And HeartMath has done amazing studies that our heart actually has a magnetic field that can be broadcast 3 to 8 feet out. I think you can measure it through a magnetometer. And so, but what we're finding is it's really nonlinear. This heart's magnetic field is infinite. And I'll share some stories on that. But our heart actually broadcasts emotions. So like, have you ever walked into a room and you feel like you could cut it with a knife? You could feel the tension, right? Or you walk into Strategic Coach after lunch and everybody's buzzing and you can feel completely different. And so, the power of the unseen, right? This magnetic energy is so much more powerful than anything we can say. So as my client who I was referencing actually got into this heart's magnetic field, she actually started to change the environment and impacting her son with this. And I used to think this stuff was crazy woo-woo, but I've seen so much evidence that we'll actually teach SWAT teams to go in and they get into this heart coherence and they say they're literally changing the situation when they show up to a scene where somebody might be angry or whatever. They're in this heart coherence. They see the person shifting in front of their eyes. And even with programs we've done, and our friend Susie Miller, who really works with a lot of the autistic communities, when the parents are taught how to get into this heart coherence and change their own internal state, they'll tell us that their children are speaking and being affectionate for the first time in their lives. So as we learn we always say our internal state truly creates our external reality. But not only that, when we change our own internal state, we are truly alchemists and we can start to change the environment around us.
I know we're going to talk about, I want to know some more about these non-linear stories. That story about the autism and the SWOT are like two sort of, if you're looking at a scatter plot, or like, I think of what people think what you're talking about, where this would be effective, would be two things that would be outliers. But at the end of the day, it's actually like the breadth and bandwidth of how important this is. The this is all coming together with me, that this is an inside out game. I was meeting with a guest earlier today, and it just became so clear that this is an energy game. It's just an energy game. And at the center of that energy is the heart. We'd love to think that the brain is the center of it, but it truly is like the heart, based off what you just said. Hey, by changing some of that heart coherence, all of a sudden it is changing the affect of everyone around you. And so can you talk a little bit about more of those nonlinear stories? Because I think these are just going to impress upon how heart coherence is actually maybe the genesis of communication.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I'll give you another example. So during COVID, when COVID started, there was so much confusion, misinformation, loneliness, that our community was really struggling globally. I mean, do you remember all the going on? And so we started these, what we called community coherence calls. So every day for 30 minutes, and we were doing 7 days a week to start, we would teach people how to get into heart coherence. And so they would feel themselves going from stress into this more coherent state. And then we would just do some sharing. And we'd put people in breakout rooms or whatever, and just really to create connection. And what we started to witness is people within our community started to thrive, even during the pandemic. And also, there started to be healings. People just started to like feel better, right? And certain people had autoimmune disease or chronic pain, it just went away. So we're like, this is interesting. So a friend of mine who's a molecular oncologist and was one of the head researchers at Harvard Medical School found it fascinating. And one of her friends actually had an experience of who had chronic pain, and it really helped. She actually did a white paper on our group on when people get into heart coherence and they send positive intentions to somebody, we saw unbelievable things. And again, so much so that where she used to think this was crazy, that she did a white paper on it. And we saw all types of things, but with the white paper, it really focused on individuals with chronic pain and how, they went from chronic pain to no pain or a lot less. And the more I see this stuff and even lead it, like the less I know, but it's really interesting. I'll tell you a couple of things. One is when people get into this heart coherence, right? It changes the physiology. And also when we're able to create renewing emotions like love, gratitude, it creates these chemicals in our bodies that literally heal the body. And I mentioned DHEA, which is the vitality hormone. And again, I'm really careful talking about this because I'm not a doctor, but I've just witnessed so much of it. We'll work with clients that have all the resources in the world, right? They've got the private jets and they go gluten-free and the best doctors and the IVs. And a lot of times they still are in a stress response or maybe having some physical challenges. When we can show them, we can talk about the science when we go from these depleting emotions to these renewing emotions, and they start to experience these renewing emotions, it's really cool what can happen on a physical level, but also on an emotional and mental level. And what I've realized, even through my own journey, is a lot of times we're like we talked about, we're really good at feeling negative emotions, right? We're really good at beating ourselves up, but we're not really encouraged or taught to feel these renewing emotions, right? For me, for a lot of, even with a lot of these men we work with, like emotions weren't a good thing. And then also a lot of times we feel like we don't deserve it, right? So at subconscious level, we are capping the level of joy that we can feel. But when we can start to, talk about it as fueling the machine, people can kind of allow themselves to go beyond their own self limitations. But I mean, even with the power of gratitude, Harvard Medical School went and studied the Tibetan monks in the 80s, and they saw that they were doing things that were superhuman. They were drawing wet towels on their bodies. They were producing brain waves they'd never seen, these gamma brain waves, and a number of other things. And they discovered that the way they were doing it is they were getting in such a deep state of gratitude, not just for themselves, but really at a more global level, that it was like creating these chemicals that were allowing us to do superhuman things. And, even Jimmy Carter, Desmond Tutu had an institute that was studying gratitude. I mean, think about if that just became part of our daily practice as individuals, as parents, with teams. This is one of the main things we do. We will take cultures that have been challenged, right? And maybe operating in silos. And kind of one of the things we do behind the scenes subtly is we start to introduce the concept of gratitude and have the teams start to share gratitude with each other. And one of the reasons we do this is we talked about when we're in a stress response, which a lot of our societies, this is the norm. We can get into fight or flight, into that survival mode, and we can start to look at everything as a threat, including our coworkers and our fellow leaders. And so when we do that, we are continually protecting ourselves, going into silos. When we can work with them and do the different team dynamic stuff, and then we can have them expressing gratitude for each other in a very comfortable way. The more they do that, they start to create new neural networks that basically reframe how they see that person. And there starts to become a lot more safety, right? And a lot more trust. And, we're fortunate. We work with a lot of universities also. And we did a case study with Cornell University, and we saw amazing transformation within their one of their leadership teams. And the leader that brought us on, somebody asked her, well, like, what's the main thing you've seen? Like, if you're going to sum it up. And she said, before working with Paragon, a lot of times when things were stressful or challenging, people would go into their silos, protect their turf. And now we find when things are stressful, people are actually coming together and working together. And I mean, it's because people reframe and they're in a more coherent state to show up differently.
It's so interesting that you're talking about this. And I think had we not really emphasized at the beginning that you work with like Fortune 500 companies down to like special forces, that they would go, this sounds super woo-woo-y. But I think that the more that as we start hearing this AI conversation, the more and more that I'm clear that AI is going to be a potential gateway for us to start being in more of our human beingness, like keyword being. And I think that the being is just like a very 30,000 foot word for this heart coherence that you're talking about. And I had read Tim Ferriss came out with like Tools at Titans, with he originally created for himself, and he was like, oh, actually I should publish this for everyone. And in there, I just had picked it up. This is maybe like 2 years ago, and just happened to open it up because that's kind of the type of book it is. And they were talking about this loving kindness exercise, where you literally are, especially when you're traveling, it's really easy to do, where you just see someone, you don't know them. You could just be on the subway as you're going, tram going from terminal to terminal, and you just see them. And whether you close your eyes or not, you actually just, or there's closing your eyes be kind of behind your eyes. So, and you just spend 10 seconds of sending them an immense amount of love. like the most loving feelings and like hopes and expectations for them. And I have to tell you that even to this day, like when I'm traveling, that is what I do. And even to the point now, like when I'm at home, if I'm having something like really, I'm feeling some stress, or I'm feeling like this day does not feel like it's going my way, is I will think about either someone in my life or I'll just go imagine a person I don't even know, and we'll do that. And what's interesting to me is it's like it just changes. It's just a hint. And I'm curious from your perspective, um, that it seems like that the center of all of this is love.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, on a more, I call it spiritual level, but maybe on a more human level, a lot of times when I go throughout the day or, when I get closer to a client, we say, you can show up in either love or fear, and you get to choose that in each moment. And just from the chemicals we produce and the outcomes, love is a more strategic decision, but it also benefits the planet, right? And a lot of times when people are in anger, rage, whatever, they're really just in fear. And so we continually have these, I keep saying, choice points of how we show up. And when, like, it's beautiful, like when you're radiating love to somebody on the train, at the airport, at the grocery store, it benefits humanity. And now we know there's actually a real field being created, but it also serves you, right? It's the ultimate performance tool because it's creating these chemicals that allow for you to be more present. It revitalizes you. It allows you to think more clearly. And you mentioned AI, as with technology, it's been such a beautiful thing, right? Because we have access to information at our fingertips, unlimited amounts of information. But if we don't turn off from it, right, it creates confusion, disengagement, and really this loss of human connection. And also, we go and talk to our clients. We say, with AI, your expertise isn't now always a competitive advantage, right? Because we can just access a lot of things. So that's why it's more important than ever around this human connection. And that's why one of the biggest things is just our energetics and being in the heart. And we continually see it over and over. We will train teams in just showing up, right, in this heart coherence. We'll work with sales teams and we will say, just as kind of their first homework, all we want you to do is with your client, with your prospect, is just be in a coherent state. And then two, we teach them coherent communication, and it's beyond the words. So we teach them two things. One, active listening, because we're so conditioned, especially as leaders, to always think about what we're going to say. So we miss like the punchline and the essence of what a person's saying. And when we miss the essence, then we're going on two different paths with them. And also they're not feeling like they're being heard. And then the second thing is reading beyond the words, because your client could say, or your prospect could say one thing, but the energetics are saying something completely different. And if you take them on their word, you're not actually getting to the truth of the situation. So when you can actually read the energetics and then be curious and ask question after question to actually get to the root of what is going on with them, to move from that place is going to allow for you to connect with them better and do business with them. And so when we have these sales teams go in and they're focused on their energetics, not what they're going to say, and they're really picking up on these different cues, we always laugh, but they come back and they'll say, yeah, my client prospect talked 95% of the time. At the end of the conversation, he said, this is the best meeting I've ever had. I'd really like to do business with you. And so, Maya Angelou said it perfect. Like people don't remember like what you said, right? I forget the other. They remember how you make them feel. And we're all just having this human experience. I don't care if it's like the biggest star in Hollywood or the biggest CEO or the biggest athlete, right? As we can just show up in this heart coherence and really um be complete creators and owners of our internal state, it's amazing what can be created from that.
It's just so powerful. One of the things I want to make sure that I want to anchor this back. So if people are listening to this, might be going, okay, again, I get it. You're talking about heart center, but I think the human condition is that they'll be like, okay, but what does this mean bottom line? Like, so Jeff, the people that you've worked with before heart coherence and these exercises and these techniques and afterwards, what are like the compelling outcomes that are happening as a result? Like the sales teams you're working with, they're here and where are they afterwards?
The most important thing is they are more present. They can tap into their renewing emotions, right? They're living a higher quality of life. There's a lot less stress. And then because of that, they're connecting at a deeper level with their clients, their colleagues, their families. And then because of that, their performance goes way up, right? I mean, sometimes I think we think performance is like there's this magic potion and you got to do this and this. But when we get out of a stress response into this more coherent, optimal state, and then we have the ability to listen better, think more clearly, communicate more better or more effectively, then we just are going to perform better. We're going to sell more. We're going to have bigger impact. I spoke to a group of leaders at Comcast about a year ago, and they were asking like, well, what's like your own personal truth? And I just said every time, like I used to do a lot of business classes and that type of stuff, but every time I grew on a personal level, right? Spiritual, emotional, that is when my business expanded the most. Because it's all about human connection, right? And I was able to be able to think more clearly. I mean, I think sometimes it feels so simple, but it's as easy and hard as that. And if we don't have that awareness moment by moment, then we're being run by past behaviors, right? And so the simple act of having awareness of our thoughts and emotions and owning them, and then having the tools to actually decide, is there different ways to show up? And also these things that will regulate our bodies, that influence our mind to then have a different lens, are so powerful. And people just like, when my clients are like, well, I don't have 30 minutes to do your stuff. I'm like, well, then you need to do it an hour. So, because when they start to do this stuff, it changes the lens and it changes the experience and outcomes of everything else in their life. But we get addicted again to our emotions and this and that, and we can't turn off. And then it starts to become part of our identity. And then oftentimes when we start to make changes, right? Or, we make different decisions or, we start to feel gratitude. Sometimes our body rages because our body likes what's familiar versus what's good for us.
It's like delirium tremens from like your previous state.
Yeah, exactly. And we just have to keep pushing through. And I always say, you might feel it day to day, but where you're really going to see the impact is like month to month, right? Where you have bigger time frames.
I want to get to some of these techniques because you've done a few like where I've been present and it's like, it's incredible. So I want to get to those, but it's becoming really clear. And again, one of the things that gives some context, one of my core tenets in like leadership, or just for me, like my core tenet to myself is oftentimes don't ask someone to do something that you haven't asked of yourself first. And one of the things I'm hearing from you is in this heart coherence is that what you're teaching is to see, hear, and understand people, which you've heard me say many times, which I think is actually the core foundation of how you actually show someone that you love them. And so it seems like to me, and I want to talk about self-awareness because I think that what I'm realizing is self-awareness really is the act of asking yourself to see and hear and understand yourself for who you actually are, not who you want to be, but who you actually are, in a way that is, you've worked through some of those emotions, right? Some of those, like those fear emotions that might come out in fear, anger, judgment, shame, right? And getting to more of those other ones. Can you talk a little bit about that importance of, like, we can have heart coherence, we can teach heart coherence, but it seems like to me like we need to actually have that internally first before we actually can like really fully buy in.
You're asking to have the self-awareness first before we do the heart coherence?
Is that what needs to happen, or is that something that is a maybe natural outcome? It was more of like a question statement.
Yeah, it's a great question. We can actually, just by doing the techniques, change our internal state, which then literally just gives us a different lens to how we show up. I mean, it is that simple. And we talk about performance is about getting your physiology right in the moment. And so I will do this exercise with clients all the time, and they'll come on, a session with me, and I'm like, how you feeling? And they're like, angry, anxiety, and I'm so frustrated at this person. I'm like, okay, I will lead them through a technique for 4 minutes. And then I'll say, how do you feel now? And they're like, I feel present, grateful. And I realized this person was actually doing the best they could, And I say, that was all you in 4 minutes, right? I just happened to lead you through it, but you were able to shift. When you changed your physiology, your body, you had a totally different lens to your own emotions and how you were feeling, and to a lens to a situation that now will serve you. So, I mean, I just say it over and over and over to clients, like, prioritize going from stress to this coherent state. And it literally changes your brain, right, to how you see things.
That's incredible. So let's maybe get to some of these techniques and why they're effective. Um, but I want to harken back again, because I know, and I think you're being like modest. You work with professional athletes, you work with special forces, you work with Fortune 500. What are some outcomes because of, like this? I'm asking you to brag a little bit, like, hey, before this, now after these techniques and like this awareness, they've gotten now this. Give me some highlights, like, because I my brain, I'm imagining like billions of dollars of value that was created literally by being simple.
From a health standpoint, we've seen all types of healings. And again, I'm careful saying that, but we have so much data. We have white paper. We have seen people thrive on a professional level. We work with, I wish I could give more specifics, but
Yep. No, protect your privacy.
we've had, people on Wall Street that were big names, and they were their biggest critics, and they were maybe going down a path that wasn't serving them. And as they had awareness of a different way to show up, and that they could show up in a present, grateful way and still be productive, they made millions and billions of dollars because of it. And they allowed themselves to do it in a way that they were calm, grateful, energized. And the reason I say that is, a lot of times when I work with, if it's executives, especially with professional athletes, and let's say they've been, their juice in their mind for succeeding has been anger, right? Or like this, or payback. Yeah, chip on the shoulder. So I worked with somebody that was high profile, and they definitely were being driven by the chip on the shoulder and anger. And this was years ago. And I was like, God, if I actually get them into their heart and coherence, are they going to be able to perform? Like, I had just even had a little bit of like this, but I'm like, you know what? It's always proven itself. And as we did the reflection, we changed the chemicals, the chemistry within their bodies, they performed at higher levels. And I continually see this over and over and over. And with athletes, one of the things we do, and we actually do it with all our clients, there's something called the prep technique. And I talked about the brain does not know the difference between an actual experience and a memory. So if I said to you, think of somebody that frustrates you, right? And you see their face, you will get a stress response potentially, right? And that person's not there. But this also works to our favor because when we'll work with professional athletes, like we work with a lot of tennis players, and let's say they haven't performed up to their level. And let's say they're going to play center court at the US Open or Wimbledon. When we lead them through the prep technique, we get them into heart coherence. They create those renewing emotions. And when they're creating the renewing emotions, and then they not only see themselves on center court, but they're putting the emotions to it. And when we do that many, many times, and the emotions kind of get instilled right within the body, when they actually are then, let's say, on center court at the US Open, that's what their body knows. They've already experienced it 200 times with that vision and with those emotions, right? So it completely changes, again, their physiology, and that becomes the new normal for them. And I don't know if you've seen all the experiments around, like even Harvard, and I should go back and make sure I get this completely right, but there's people, they did an experiment where a certain amount of people practiced the piano every day, and it lit up a certain part of the brain and they advanced. And then there was a group that would just practice in their head and never played the piano. And I think they had almost the same progress, right? So that is the power of the braining, right? There's been several studies on that. And so a lot of times we've always heard about visualization and seeing ourselves, but I'll tell you, the Jedi master trick is putting the emotions with it, right? So let's say you're going to go speak to 20,000 people on your speaking tour. If we keep going over the prep technique where you are seeing yourself on stage, but every time we do the exercise, you're feeling deep love and gratitude. When you actually get on that stage, right, you've already been there 100 times, 200 times doing it. And so typically that's how you're going to show up. Powerful. And I know this, and I help people, and I don't do it enough in my own world.
So it's so incredible. The brain is it's a sponge that's just waiting to be soak in whatever it either is told, you tell it experiences, or that you give belief and validity to. And
just say also, there's a lot of different stories I could share. And on our website, we have a lot of different people sharing their experiences through our program. So I just thought I wanted to honor that question. And also, if anybody's interested, we'll send case studies that our clients have done around the transformation we've created.
Oh, that's fantastic. There's other people who kind of really sort of talked around it, maybe almost incidentally are touching on this heart coherence. But I feel like you're the first person I've talked to that has literally went, no, physiology, but here, this specific portion. Jeff, let's move into some techniques, right? Because I've heard you talk about techniques. And I want to start off with of your different techniques, the simplest one that's really free, that just requires this simple thing that we always do, that the brain is always looking for, right? Is answering questions. What are 2 to 3 questions that you think that if people started asking themselves every single day, or maybe not even every day, but if they start to feel those those fear-based emotions to ask themselves. Like, what would you say to that of like these questions?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would, when this stuff comes up, if they're feeling fear, anger, whatever it is, the first piece is having awareness and actually feeling the emotion, right? Like honoring it. And then I would say, I would have them do the hard focus breathing, change their physiology, and just ask themselves, is there a different way I could feel right now that would serve me?
If I was our audience, I'd be thinking about, is there a blueprint, Jeff, right? This is great. You're working with, billionaires, millionaires, professional athletes, special forces, like people, and that's really great. And maybe in terms of, I don't necessarily have the budget to be able to work with you, or my company's not big enough, but like, is there a simple blueprint that if you walked me through that would literally change, like just help me change?
Yes. I love that question. If if you do this 10 to 15 minutes a day, I'll give you a couple things. You will start to see changes. The first thing is when you wake up in the morning, just set your intentions of how you want to show up. How do you want to feel? And what do you want to think? Because as we talked about, the brain's a record of the past, right? 95% of our thoughts, subconscious, 90% same as day before. So unless we set a vision for the future, we just keep going back to past behaviors, right? And thoughts. So again, to set in the morning your intentions of how you want to show up. And then it creates a map for that. The second thing is to do, and I would love to lead you through this, quick coherence. So to do quick coherence in the morning takes 5 minutes, resets the nervous system. It gets those renewing emotions activated, right? So gives you a different lens throughout the day. The third is just to take pauses to do this heart focused breathing before different meetings, calls, just to reset the nervous system, right? To give you that pause to show up in a more optimal way. Another one is to allow yourself to connect with renewing emotions throughout the day. We talked about when we go from negative emotion, depleting emotions to renewing, this flood of new chemicals and hormones that really serve us. And so when clients start to put like pictures of their pets or their grandchildren or their favorite athlete, whoever it is, and they keep connecting it throughout the day, they find they have more energy and they're renewed, right? It's just feeding the system. Another one is just recognizing when you're having negative thinking or looping, because, we kind of joke, but people can loop on negative thoughts on and on and on. We'll ask a client like, why are you so angry? And they're like, oh, my friend said this to me 6 months ago. Right. And we're like, okay, but think about it. Right. And the thing is, the more you ruminate on a thought, the more it gets more deeply ingrained in our neural networks. So it's really important to break these negative thoughts or this looping. And just, you can do it through the hard focus breathing, right? Change it through physiology. And then also, again, reflect on, is there a different thought that could serve you, right? With this. Another thing is do this quick coherence at night. It resets the nervous system. I think a lot of people are having challenges with sleep. And we find when they get out of the stress response into the more coherent state, they're actually sleeping better. And then another one is just to do a bedtime review, right? Of like, how did I show up in a way that served me, right? Like, oh my God, I got this email that upset me. Actually, instead of reacting, I went for a walk. I did hard focus breathing, and I actually wrote a more thoughtful note. Because think about the chain of events when you write an angry email and then all the things that can happen versus you go for a walk, you get into coherence, and you write a more thoughtful note. That's our moments. These moments create our future. So each moment, how he shows up creates the future for us. And then also where you could show up better, like I, yesterday I just worked all day. I was a little reactive and I didn't take any breaks. And so it showed up at the end of the day. And so, when I was reflecting last night, I was like, just, go for a walk, even for 5 minutes, call a friend, connect with gratitude, right? We are the creators of our own world. It's the path of masterhood. And again, our internal state, prioritizing that over everything, then creates a completely different external reality.
That's amazing. Jeff, could you actually like live like you to me in terms of can we do like some of these like breathing exercises like guided by you? Because I'm guessing people are like this would be great and you could even send it to me, but boy, I've done this with you in the past and it was and you did this in a room with about like 45 people and it was like you just felt the room shift and it was pretty incredible. So would you be willing to do that?
I would love it. I would love it. So maybe we'll start with just a quick coherence. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'll lead you through it. And then when I say put your attention in your heart and just breathe in and out of your heart, don't overthink it, just like whatever you're feeling. But wherever we put our attention, the energy goes. So when you actually start to put attention in the area of the heart, it changes the rhythms of the heart, which sends different neural signals to your brain, which, tells your amygdala it's safe, all these good things happen. And then I'm going to ask you to connect with a renewing emotion. So, Ben, what's a memory that provides a feeling of joy, gratitude, love for you?
Well, I mean, one that happened, 4 months ago. The birth of my daughter, being able to hold her for the first time.
Okay, I just felt that. And what emotions do you feel?
I feel the joy of what like Christmas felt like when I was 4 years old.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, all right. So yeah, the listeners and you, just give yourself these 3 minutes to just go completely present. Just close your eyes and just start to take some smooth, easy inhales and smooth, easy exhales. And just feel your body relax a little bit more with each exhale. And now count to 5 on your inhales. Count to 5 on your exhales. Or find a count that's comfortable to you. And now put your attention in the area of the heart and just breathe into your heart as if it's the only place the breath can go. And from your heart as it is the only place the breath can come from. And now just connect with a renewing emotion. Just connect with a memory that provides a feeling of joy, gratitude, love. And just allow yourself to feel this within your body. Just allow yourself to increase that feeling a little bit more. And just take a couple more deep breaths in, deep breaths out. Whenever you're ready, you could open your eyes. How you feel?
Incredible. Feel incredible.
Beautiful. So that was all you. And that was 3-4 minutes maybe. And from a performance standpoint, right now, you're in a more optimal state, right? You've optimized key brain centers. Your body's happy, right? You've created chemicals that renew, revitalize it. So, sometimes, there's been millions of books written about performance, but this is evidence of getting your physiology right in the moment. So as you can keep coming back to this is one of the number one high performance tools.
Wow. So I can do this as many times as I want in a day.
As many times as you want. There's no side effects.
Except happiness.
Except happiness, yeah.
Wow. That is absolutely incredible. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. This was like, what a gift. What an absolute gift. It's not only in terms of like opinion or experiences, but it was like backed up by like stories and evidence and studies. And then, quite frankly, we all got to actually experience the evidence of ourselves with you sharing that blueprint and then walking us through that quick breathing, that quick heart connection was just absolutely fantastic. What if people want to know more about you, Jeff, or where to find you, or to read, or to want to engage you? Like, what are you working on right now? Where can find you, and what are things that are coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, thank you. I think the best way is our website is at performanceparagon.com. And we've actually entered the 21st century. We just started an Instagram page, and we have a lot of cool content around, performance, HRV. We're doing a lot. That's a really hot topic. And also we just launched programs for individuals for the first time. For the last 10 years, we've really been doing it for organizations. We've had a lot of our community say, that's great, but what if I just want to do it as an individual? And so every 2 months, we run programs on HRV and also what we call an optimal performance program. And there are 3 virtual sessions and then private coaching as a part of it. And it's powerful, but you're also a part of a community to go through this together. And then the other thing is, any of your listeners, we do these free global coherence calls 4 times a week. And so if anybody's interested, send me an email at jeff@performanceparagon.com and I'll invite you to it, because it's really powerful to do these techniques. And then it gets amplified when you do it with a group. There is magic that happens. And the more you do it, the more you're resetting your nervous system and really creating new behaviors and a new way of being in this world.
That's incredible. Wow. What a gift for free. They can just come.
Yeah. Just show up 20 minutes and our master trainers lead it. Sometimes I lead it. We've had multiple people said it's been a life changer.
Wow. Just as a kind of bonus little part of our episode, can you talk about like why you're focusing on HRV and why potentially someone would want to like, HRV isn't just a metric of, your health or your physical performance, but can you just give a little, uh, I guess, like reason why?
Yeah, definitely. So HRV, heart rate variability, has become one of the standards on really how we measure our physical and emotional resilience. And HRV is basically it's measuring the time between each heartbeat. And they used to think that you wanted the same amount of time between each heartbeat. Let's say it's zero point 0.8 seconds, zero point 0.8 seconds, whatever it is. You actually want variability between each heartbeat. So 0.4 to 0.8 to 0.7. And these different devices from like Aura to Whoop to Apple measure HRV. And so it's actually a metric that gives you data on your physical and emotional resilience. And so we teach different programs. Like we're actually doing a 3-part series now around HRV. The first one was around sleep, and we give how important it is and really the blueprint of things you can do to sleep better. People say, what's the number one thing you're going to recommend for high performance? Well, it's got to be sleep before anything else, right? And then we just did one yesterday with our community on stress, the impact of stress on, and then the next one I think is on environment, nature, those type of things. But yeah, HRV is a huge measurement of our overall health. And I definitely encourage people, to measure it in different ways. And the higher HRV, the better.
Jeff, any socials? I know you said in terms of the Instagram, are you active on LinkedIn?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. We've got a Jeffrey Benton and then Paragon Performance Evolution. We've also got a LinkedIn page.
Fantastic. Any books? Any books coming up?
Working on one right now. I wrote a chapter in a book about gratitude. And I cannot remember the name of the book now. Oh, but if anybody's interested, I'll send it to them. I wrote it years ago, and it was around my own personal story of, having a lot of fear, angers, and then my mom, who was my superhero, took her life, and so it was really around the journey of that, of having a lot of anger, shame, sadness, to then going through to really feeling deep gratitude and love again for my mom.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have you back on the podcast because we may have to unearth that chapter because that's pretty powerful. Jeff, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. Thanks for sharing so generously. And it's an absolute pleasure. I get to see you every 90 days. And this was really fun to actually have an allocated 90 plus minute session for us to be able to really dive into the things that have been really apparent to me. And it's just really clear why like you are changing people's lives. And I will tell you for one, I'm going to be doing that 4-minute exercise because that was a pretty awesome outcome and it was free.
Beautiful. Thank you. It is an honor and a gift. And I was just going to say, Ben is one of my teachers in life. And it's been incredibly impactful working with you. And I really want to express that.
Oh, well, I super appreciate it. It helps when you have incredible ingredients to work with. So thank you to you, Jeff, for being that. Jeff, one of the things I like to do in sending off our episodes is having our guests give the last ripple. And that could be a thought, a question, call to action, a quote, whatever it is you want. What is it that you want our audience to leave with today?
2 things. Our internal state creates our external reality. I know this is a deep, deep truth. And a way to think about it, we've talked about Peak performance is all about getting our physiology right in the moment. And I always say the good news is stress does not live in our external circumstances. Doesn't live with the boss who thinks we're available 24/7, teenager asking us for money. Stress lives in the body. And the reason that's good news is we can't always change our external circumstances, but we can always change our physiology through these techniques and having a different mindset. And when we do that, it literally then creates different external circumstances.
That's incredible. Jeff, thank you. What a great episode.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.